Well, as lawmakers around the world are shaping economic policies to lead us out of this pandemic, there are actually renewed calls to focus on sustainability and the impact to climate. 2020 already shaping up to be one of the warmest years, if not the warmest year on record. And scientists say we can't afford to push climate action to the back burner or to the side right now. Akiko Fujita joins us with a new series we're launching today called Climate Crisis.
Hi. It's a tradition steeped in 35 years of history. And for Bobby Colbert, his nephew and brother Denny, lobster fishing has been the only way of life.
We got a banning tool around, Den?
They've really known.
And there you go. We were fishing in grade school and high school to make money. And at one point, Denny and I decided that maybe if we actually put some effort into this fishing thing, we could make some money at it. Here we go, Joe.
But warming waters are threatening to disrupt Colbert's family business.
Yep.
Temperatures along the coast of southern New England have climbed 9 degrees since 2012.
9 degrees Fahrenheit. Help us understand how significant that is.
Typical temperature variations might be 2 degrees Fahrenheit there, and fish are probably sensitive at about 1 degree Fahrenheit there. So it's almost an order of magnitude more than you normally need to get some kind of a change.
Scientist Glen Gawarkiewicz has been tracking the waters off of Cape Cod for the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. He says temperatures here are rising faster than any region in the world outside of the Arctic. And that's shifting the entire ecosystem, bringing non-native fish like black sea bass into unfamiliar waters.
They were found, for example, a lot off New Jersey, but now they're in southern New England. And perhaps one of the most dramatic examples recently was in January of 2017. There were juvenile black sea bass that were caught near Block Island, south of the coast of Rhode Island there, in January, and that had never happened before.
This is called the kitchen pot of the trap.
The changes have prompted scientists to lean on fishermen like Colbert to capture the temperature swings in the ocean and determine how that affects his catch.
When the trap comes up, we take it out, we put it into our mini logger here, it downloads the information into here, and then it downloads it into our iPad.
Colbert hasn't seen a dramatic shift in the number of lobsters he catches, but warmer waters have pushed fishermen further offshore.
So we're on over this area over here.
Colbert's also expanding what he catches to reduce his reliance on lobsters.
It has to be at least this wide. So you can see this one is well over the size, you know.
The Jonah crab, once considered worthless, has seen its market value double in 20 years.
It's exciting to be part of the industry that's really growing. Yeah. To see that, I mean, at our age, to see like,
you're
wow,
introducing something new.
Yeah, it's been underutilized, and there's a huge biomass of them out there.
Depleting fish stock have also given rise to another alternative. Chris Kerr is part of the growing plant-based movement, offering a substitute to seafood.
We're just using legumes and plants. It's a very simple model that we have. You know, there's some people might say that there's a yuck factor to this idea of plant-based tuna. Compare it to a dead fish, I think we're going to win that game.
Good Catch only sells plant-based tuna now, but Kerr says the seafood industry is ripe for disruption. And it's the economics, not just environmental concerns, that are driving demand.
So you still have to hunt for them, and if you have to go further and further, the economics dwindle. Going all the way to the Falkland Islands to bring a tuna fish sandwich to Maine doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Anything that would be bigger than this would throw back in.
Back on the Cape, Colbert says the changing climate is changing the outlook for fishermen here.
This one still has a ways to go to still be oversized.
They're limiting the size of the lobsters they keep, protecting female lobsters capable of carrying eggs. An industry that once thrived on taking everything it can is now starting to think about leaving something behind.
It has to be sustainable because, we want to pass something on to the next generations and stuff, and it's a resource that the world eats.
And let's bring in Akiko now, as well as Nick Butler, King's College London visiting professor. He's joining us from Wales today. Akiko, so obviously this issue of climate change was pressing even before, and now we're looking at perhaps in a different light because of this pandemic.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And there are a number of things that can really connect what we have seen with the coronavirus as well as climate change. For one, we have seen a dramatic drop in the greenhouse gas emissions over the last few months. We're looking at a record drop of 8% this year if we kind of stay on this path, largely because businesses have shut down, people have stayed indoors. And so a lot of climate activists have said that's proof that there can be collective global action. The other concern is what we've seen with the pandemic in terms of the significant drop in economic activity. You know, what we have learned with all of this is that by the time you see the real red flags, the warning signs, a lot of ways, it's too late to act. And so the argument being here that the action needs to come right now, with a lot of governments sort of redrawing up their economic roadmap out of this pandemic. The argument here being that sustainability really should be at the center of those broader goals.
So, Nick, to bring you into this, as with climate change, the conversation sort of typically goes, this is what should happen. But what will happen is frequently quite different than that. Do you think that there is any kind of renewed resolve on the part of global leaders on this front?
I hope so, but I'm not sure it's there yet. I think what we've seen from the coronavirus pandemic is that there are a lot of things now in the world that don't recognize national boundaries. You started your bulletin by talking about the oil prices, and there you see a global crisis unmanaged, which is having very negative effects in parts of the US as well as the Middle East. You've seen with the pandemic started in China, but now it's racing through Europe, still in the UK, still in the US. And I think what the lesson is that we need some global oversight and governance of these issues, and particularly the issue of sustainability. I don't think any country, no one is an island anymore from the changes that are going on. And I hope we will, out of this crisis, think in more international terms, and understand that we have to work together to get these things right.
Nick, you have argued for a global independent body to oversee some of this climate action, sort of similar to what we've seen with the WHO. But the UN Climate Committee already handles that. I mean, you could argue that there is an annual COP meeting that hasn't necessarily been effective when you've got countries like the US that aren't willing to sign on board with the Paris Climate Agreement. How do you think an independent body would change that?
Well, I think the UN bodies have tried very hard. They have defined the problem. Now I think people need to come together to define the solution, which is not instant, and it's not a matter of everybody doing the same thing. It's a matter of everybody working in a common direction. And that is the history of the WHO, the health organization. It's the history of the IMF and the institutions that were created at the end of the Second World War. We need a new generation of those institutions now to look at issues of energy and climate change and the environment more generally, and to pool our efforts to try and stop more risks that affect everybody.
Nick, it's Adam. I realize that the global economic shutdown is brief compared to the decades of warming climate, but are we getting any kind of data that could be used, whether it's replenishing of fish stocks or the pollution levels falling, that could be used to convince world leaders that we really do need to move in the direction you're suggesting?
Yes, we're beginning to see that in places like India, which is still very dependent on coal, the fact that the economy is running at a lower level using less coal is actually having a very good effect on air quality. But we can't solve this by just having the world in recession. There will be a fall in emissions this year. I don't think it'll be as much as 8%, as one of your commentators said earlier. I think it'd be more like 4 or 5, and it will come back next year. You already see Chinese industry building up again as their share of the epidemic has almost come to an end. You see India planning to rescue their coal industry and rely on coal for the next 2 decades at least. These are not steps that are going to be changed by this pandemic unless we have real dialogue and international understanding that the risks are common to everybody.
Nick, we have seen the private sector step up in a bigger way to tackle the issue of climate change. But the argument we have heard for many years is that climate action doesn't necessarily equal good business. In other words, those investments could be spent in a better way. And I'm wondering, as we look to come out of this economic downturn that's been caused by a pandemic, how do you think governments and the private sector should be looking at this, weighing sort of the cost benefit? There's a bit of a reset, you could argue, and this is kind of a good opportunity to look at this.
Yes, it's a reset. I think we should be looking at what can be done in the short term, how we can use energy more efficiently, how we can move away from the most carbon intensive sources, but also long term, and this is where I think the US does come in, developing the technologies, energy storage, batteries, and also the use of hydrogen. Those are the big things that will go beyond the renewables technologies we have now. Those are the things that can help solve it. And I think government should be carefully putting money into the national labs and similar institutions around the world which can find the answers. And it's comparable, I would say, to finding the vaccine that is going to, in the end, close down the CV-19 crisis.
Nick Butler, thank you so much for your time. Nick Butler is a King's College London visiting professor. He joined us from Wales, and our own Akiko Fujita, who's been working on this climate crisis coverage. And we should mention our climate crisis series continues next Tuesday. We're going to take a look at rising sea levels and the impact on cities and communities around the country. We'll be right back.